Yo, what's up guys? In this video, we're diving into the story of Arkaya, once known as the birthplace of incredibly talented and powerful mages. This went on for ages, but one day, humanity lost this gift, and the country's power faded, turning it into just another kingdom. Arkaya was left relying on the kindness of other, greater powers, and other ways to survive, like marrying off the princess. So let's head to the palace where our main girl lives. Just then, the second prince of Arkaya, Tsander Keteril, bursts into the living room. He yelled that it couldn't be happening, turned to his sister saying there's still time to change her mind, but his older brother told him to shut it. The young man, who looked exactly like Tsander, told his younger brother that this wasn't a conversation for everyone to hear. This guy was the first prince of Arkaya, Dietrich Keteril, but that didn't stop the kid from yelling at him. He insisted that it was totally insane to force his own sister into marriage with that brutal tyrant, Kana Riandan. The kid said that the rumors are that Kana is so bloodthirsty, he kills people just for kicks. He also talked about the rumors surrounding the marriage, saying that Arkaya made a peace treaty by selling off the princess. Enough already. Ezebia Catharil, the fair-haired beauty and first princess of the Arkaya kingdom, told her little brother. The boy gave his sister a pleading look, but she declared that she genuinely wanted this marriage, not her brother Dietrich. She added that it was entirely her decision, so there was no need for him to make such a fuss. Xander started crying and tried to argue with the emerald-eyed beauty, but she assured him that everything would be all right. He muttered through his teeth that he didn't understand why Ezebia was doing this, that she'd tasked him with obeying his brother and looking after their father. The girl told the boy to take care of himself, and Dietrich remarked that the people of Arkaya, like him, would forever be grateful to her for this act. The girl thought that she had known since childhood that marriage for love was a luxury for a noble aristocrat. She realized that this marriage was the only way to save her homeland from the impending danger. I felt so bad for our main character because she sacrificed her destiny for this, and now here she stands in a white dress at the altar. The priest asks if Ezebia Catharil will take Kana Riandan as her husband, and the girl answers, "I do." She knew she couldn't answer any other way, not when the guy in front of her was the emperor himself, and the priest had just declared them husband and wife. He asked them to seal their union with a vow of a kiss. Then Kana lifted his wife's veil and asked her to close her eyes. As their lips touched, the young man asked if she was all right, and the girl realized there was no turning back now. The main character looked at Lord Kana and realized that from this day forward, after that vow of a kiss, this man was her husband forever. After the ceremony, the girl, now a wife, rode from the church in a carriage, while her newly minted husband rode on horseback, leading the procession. Sitting in the carriage, the main character sadly noted that the wedding ceremony had gone by way too fast, and her husband seemed like he'd been snatched away. But you, dear viewer, probably guessed, just like Ezebia, that there's a good reason for that, since the kingdom is brand new and you can't leave it without the emperor for too long. At first, the girl thought it was a good thing, because it meant that His Majesty prioritized running the kingdom. Ezebia knew the rumors said Kana was a bloodthirsty tyrant, but up close he looked like a god. No wonder everyone respected him so much, unlike her. I think if you saw the girl's new husband, you'd understand how she felt. Compared to him, she felt like absolutely nothing. Turns out she had an ace up her sleeve too. Way back when, the Catharil family got blessed by the guardian of Silverwood Forest. In every generation, one mage awakens. Their destiny? Unleashing the magic flowing deep within the earth and protecting their country. This generation's mage was Ezebia, but she didn't exactly get a huge helping of magical power. Might sound weird since the main character's a total knockout, but she was stressing about whether she could actually handle being empress. Ezebia figured she was so pathetic that His Highness would get bored and kick her to the curb the second he felt like it. She was so lost in her head, she didn't even notice some shady stranger peeking out from between the trees. Our girl glanced out the window, trying to figure out what was going down in the woods by the road, but it was too late. A magic cloud popped out of the mage's hand, and an arrow shot out of it, straight at the young empress's carriage. There was a loud crack, a scream, and the horses whinnied. His Highness slammed to a halt, and for a split second, our hearts stopped too. The emperor yelled, asking what was happening. The guards shouted that the empress's carriage was under attack, and her worried hubby rushed over there like a bat out of hell. He wanted to check if his wife was hurt, but things were way worse than he thought. We know you guys are wondering what's up with the main character. But to get the full picture, we gotta rewind to one night when the princess confessed to Dietrich that she was scared stiff. Azevia was saying she didn't want to marry Kana and leave for the kingdom of Riandon. The thought of marrying that tyrant just freaked her out. She asked if there wasn't another way to save the country. Her brother said it broke his heart to see her suffering like that. He explained there was nothing they could do. Arkai didn't have the strength to fight. The troops were exhausted, supplies were running out, and there was nowhere left to retreat. The young man pointed out how messed up it was that Arkai didn't have a mage who could defend their homeland. Prince Dietrich summed it up, saying that's just the harsh reality. They had to do everything they could for the good of their country. For some reason, this was the conversation the main character remembered as she slid to the floor of the carriage with an arrow in her chest. The girl realized her brother was right. If she had strong magical powers, she would at least be useful for something. Lying on the ground, the girl finally snapped back to reality from someone shouting her name and begging her to wake up. She was surprised she felt okay, even though she distinctly remembered an arrow piercing her chest just a minute ago. Azevia heard Kanak shouting her name, so she turned around and was stunned by what she saw. The Emperor was praying to the Lord and asking him for something, and get this, the body he was carrying belonged to the Empress herself. The guards asked the Lord if the Empress had really passed away, and he replied that it was all his fault. He said he shouldn't have trusted those filthy northerners and agreed to participate in their dirty schemes. From now on, the alliance is broken. Kanak declared that Arkaya would pay in blood for their betrayal and ordered them to return immediately and start preparing for war. The Empress's spirit screamed at the top of her lungs and tried to stop her husband, but to no avail. No one could hear her. The main character's ghost tried to catch up with His Majesty, but she crumpled and fell from a burning pain in her chest. It felt like her body was about to tear into 1,000,000 pieces. It hurt so bad that the girl couldn't move. Suddenly, she heard a young man laugh and say that Arkaya would have to witness its own destruction. He called Azabia his poor little thing and said he was sorry she was still breathing while bleeding out. The ghost, pulling itself up, managed to recognize Dietrich in the approaching stranger, and with a satisfied look, crawled towards him. Suddenly, from the other end of the carriage, another man's voice rang out, asking His Highness how the plan was going. The prince beamed with a smile and replied that he was very pleased, since he had finally managed to get rid of all the obstacles. Azabia's spirit was shocked by what she heard, but she was even more surprised when she heard her brother's next words. He said that it wouldn't hurt to personally confirm his sister's death, but the stranger assured him there was nothing to worry about. He said that the arrow hit right in the heart, and death was guaranteed. At that moment, the main character realized just how disgusting her brother was. Dietrich, in a serious tone, warned the hooded figure that this wasn't the end of the deal. He had simply allowed him to deal with his sister. He reminded him that the hooded figure had promised to grant him such power that it would bring the Riandon Empire to its knees. The man reassured His Highness, guaranteeing that Arkaya would win in the drawn-out war, and the prince's fame would spread throughout the continent. Dietrich muttered how much he regretted Kana taking the body, since his sister was born a mage, and her corpse would have been useful. After those words, the main character fell into utter despair, not understanding why her brother was being so cruel now. You guys are probably just as shocked by this conversation. Azabia always thought she had a wonderful relationship with her older brother, but it turned out he secretly hated her. After a while, just as the hooded stranger predicted, a bloody war broke out. Azabia remained a ghost, trapped in the forest where she was killed, and her life became a living hell. She couldn't find a logical explanation for all the terrible events she was forced to witness. The main character's spirit had to resign herself to simply watching in silence, since she couldn't do anything, but the war just wouldn't end. After accusing the Riandon Empire of assassinating the princess, Dietrich planned to crush them in war by allying with the Northern Kingdom. But Kana quickly dealt with everyone, winning victory after victory, and driving Arkaya further and further into despair. In the face of war, everything lost its meaning. The forests and fields of Archaea, which the main character loved in life, were no longer beautiful. The cold, lifeless bodies of the princess's loved ones were like a cruel joke at her foolish death. In the third year of the war, Dietrich was captured and brought before Emperor Kana. Everyone around him demanded his immediate execution. But even in this situation, the young ruler of Archaea couldn't tame his proud spirit, mocking and insulting the emperor. He shouted that even though Kana had killed his entire family and plundered his kingdom's lands, it didn't mean he'd won. The monarch of Archaea told the emperor that the curse of the entire Catheril line would haunt him until his dying day, but Kana just smiled. And he told Dietrich that he could curse the emperor after death, so he'd follow the screams and finish off his spirit. Ezebia saw her older brother killed with her own eyes, and then His Majesty Kana ordered everything here to be burned. Part of me feels bad for the main character, but another part is thrilled that this awful character finally got what was coming to them. The main character's ghost wept over the corpse and asked if the impossible plan was worth it, and then burst out laughing like a maniac. She turned to the Silver Forest and tearfully begged it to take her soul, but to somehow help Archaea. The girl begged the forest to give her a chance to turn back time, when suddenly a green light poured from the sky, blinding her. For those of you who get a little emotional, maybe look away, because she opened her eyes to someone calling her by name, calling her their precious child. Ezebia asked if the Silver Forest was speaking to her, but when she focused, she realized her father and younger brother were looking at her with tired eyes. She returned their joyful greeting and hugged them tightly, but even after a few minutes, she still couldn't believe it. It's no wonder, since just recently she was staring at the corpses of her loved ones, and now they're right here with her, alive and well. Her father called for the royal physician and asked if the princess had a rough night. Would there be any side effects? The man assured him that everything was fine. The princess's eyes and hair changed color, as expected for a mage whose powers have awakened. He said this awakening is the first in 100 years, and not all the details are known. The girl felt like she'd been doused with ice water. Ezebia wondered what magic they were talking about. Her abilities awakened when she was 10 years old. Could it be she's gone back in time? The girl thought, no way, this can't be happening. I must be losing it. This isn't real, it's all just a hallucination. Xander noticed his little sister's pensive face and told her not to get sick, because they needed to be together as long as possible. Ezebia touched her brother's face to make sure it wasn't a dream, and that he was warm. The girl cried, which is understandable. After all, anyone would get choked up in that situation. The main character mentally thanked the Silver Forest for hearing her pleas and giving her a second chance. She promised herself that she wouldn't let him go this time, and would protect her family and kingdom at any cost. The next day, sitting over a flower pot, Ezebia came to the conclusion that what she had in mind wouldn't be so easy to pull off. It would take power mightier than any guardian, and the Silver Forest was the deity that protected Archaea. The goddess Fahar had a sister who, after death, was reborn as a silver tree growing at the edge of the world. A forest grew around the tree, bordering the kingdom of Archaea, and its inhabitants began to ask the Silver Forest for blessings. Those who received the blessing became guardians of Archaea and protected the kingdom from any danger. But Archaea's glorious days were over. Suddenly, magic disappeared across the entire continent, and the forest's blessing vanished too. With all the guardians gone, Archaea teetered on the brink of collapse. The princess's awakening as a mage became the only hope. Everyone congratulated Her Highness, celebrated her like she was a treasure, and rejoiced that the kingdom of Archaea finally had a guardian. But the happiness didn't last. They soon realized the princess couldn't wield the necessary magical power. Joy turned to scorn, because all the young princess could do as a guardian was talk to flowers and trees. The girl was certain something went wrong during the awakening. The trees insisted she was incredibly fortunate. The trees were kind, but it didn't help her deal with the people's criticism. In her past life, she could only watch her kingdom fall apart. But now things are different. Ezebia hoped that if the Silver Forest truly heard her pleas, it had granted her the power to protect her country. The main character saw a green sprout burst through the earth and thought, seriously? That's it? She wondered if her prayers were misunderstood, if she was brought back to life and gifted with this talent. Okay, this is definitely an upgrade from my past life, but the heroine knew this power wasn't gonna cut it against the Emperor. Hearing a familiar dude's voice greeting her, Azabia turned around and saw her older brother alive and grinning. He confessed he'd heard his sis had awakened some power and that it was giving her killer headaches. The guy said he felt super bad, but his sugary smile just felt totally fake. In that instant, the girl suddenly remembered back in her past life, Dietrich saying her body would be useful since she was a mage. Azabia was acting weird and gave her brother a suspicious look, and he asked her if she was all right. She apologized, blaming it on feeling rough from her powers kicking in, and asked Dietrich to cut her some slack. The young man assured her it was no problem. He understood she was having a rough time and wished her a speedy recovery. The girl noted to herself that now she knew her brother's real motives. She could feel the phoniness dripping from every word. The dude squeezed her hands and apologized for having to break some bad news right then. Dietrich said he was personally proud his sister became a guardian, but a lot of folks don't believe the Catheril line is blessed. The guy went on, saying it sucked, but the people of Arkai doubted the Silver Forest actually gave the princess magical powers. The main character exclaimed that was outrageous, and the young man rattled on that he didn't doubt her for a second. The prince said you could see where they were coming from. Yeah, magic woke up, but who knows if Her Highness can even use it. Azabia wanted to argue, but then figured the only proof of her power she had was just one little sprout. Her brother told his sister not to get bummed out. The kingdom shouldn't have put so much hope on the poor kid anyway. The girl thought about how weird it all was. Dietrich's words, gestures, expressions, tone were all the same as always. She remembered once, as a kid, Azabia ran up to her brother to brag she could finally use magic. She said she talked to the flowers at kindergarten that day, and they shared their memories with her. The little girl asked if that was her ability and how she could use it, but Dietrich said it was just a little trick, not magic. He told her to think about what people would say when they found out that's all she was good for. The guy asked his sister not to tell anyone about his power and promised he'd protect her. All she had to do was stay by his side. He insisted his sister wouldn't have to do anything. He'd take care of everything. Those memories made the girl feel sick. Dietrich asked worriedly if Azabia was okay. The main character couldn't answer clearly. A sudden inner voice cut her off. It said he knew this would happen, because Azabia wasn't really capable of anything, especially not getting revenge or protecting Archaia. The girl tried to convince herself it was a hallucination, but the voice kept saying the Silver Forest hadn't given her anything. The inner voice laughed, saying Azabia had just been played, tricked into reliving terrible events. The girl waved off the nagging voice and yelled that it wasn't true. Dietrich was really surprised and asked if his sister was feeling all right. She answered that she was fine. The main character told herself she needed to meet with the Silver Forest and figure out what it wanted from her, if it wasn't planning on saving her. The problem was, the Silver Forest was on the edge of the kingdom, and the weather wasn't exactly cooperating. The guards kept trying to get the lady to go back to the carriage, but she told them she couldn't do that just yet. Before this, the princess had asked her father for permission, but he didn't understand why she needed to go to the Silver Forest. The girl replied that she thought it was the logical thing to do after she'd awakened. The man explained that only the king was allowed to meet with the mistress of the Silver Forest, and even then, only once. He said that, sure, she seemed friendly enough, but even she had times when she was wilder than a blizzard. Her father remembered visiting the mistress of the Silver Forest once to bring his wife, Azabia's mother, back to life, but she refused. She said bringing the dead back to life went against the laws of the goddess Sahar. He lost a lot that day. He clarified that he was afraid something might happen to his daughter after this trip, but the girl told him not to worry. She said she had to do it for the country and promised to return if anything went wrong. Then her father took off his pendant and gave it to her. The man explained that it was an artifact that granted warmth. He had once given it to his now deceased wife. According to her father, this artifact was supposed to help his daughter, and it did, thanks to it. Her body temperature did not drop. Azabia squeezed the pendant tightly in her palms, kissed it, and mentally thanked her father and mother. The girl thought that she didn't want to lose loved ones anymore and would change fate for that reason. She decided that in the current circumstances there was no other way. She had to disregard what others thought and use her weak magic. The guards begged her ladyship to get up, but without hesitation she pressed her bare hands to the frozen ground. Her Highness mentally addressed the plants of the Silver Forest and said that she needed to meet with the lady. Azebia asked her to hear her pleas and led her into her leafy temple. The guards raised their heads and froze in shock at what they saw because the blizzard suddenly stopped, a bright sun shone, and the sky turned blue. Azebia took it as a sign, like she was cleared for entry, and ordered the guards to stay put and wait. Then she headed deeper into the woods. As our girl walked, she noticed it was even colder out in the sticks. Her skin was already numb from the freezing air. She heard a melodic voice calling her name, calling her a sweet child, and saw a tree with silver leaves up ahead. She couldn't believe her luck, finally meeting the lady of the Silver Forest. Meanwhile, that same mysterious voice asked what brought Azebia here in this life. It hit the main character like a ton of bricks. She realized she was right all along, that it was the Silver Forest talking to her in her past life. The princess asked the Lady of the Silver Forest, the guardian of Arkai, if she was brought back to life because they needed something from her. Azebia promised to do whatever was asked of her and confessed there was one more thing she wanted to ask the Silver Forest for. The princess asked if she could be gifted with more magical abilities, since she gave up her soul for rebirth. The tree told Azebia she was mistaken. It had been watching her all this time, sure, but it never answered any of her prayers. Silverwood clarified he only grants the wishes of monarchs, but she argued she heard his voice before her rebirth. He told the uninvited guest to go home because her body couldn't handle the local frost, and the pendant would soon stop working. The voice mumbled quickly that the princess was as stubborn as her father, and she loudly declared she didn't care. She was willing to die there. She added it was the best option because she wasn't going to silently watch the war like in her past life. The main character fell to her knees and started begging tearfully because she wanted to save her kingdom, not hide behind anyone else. Silverwood tried to calm Azebia down, but she kept crying. Then he admitted he couldn't give magic to the Guardians anymore. He clarified that her past life being so bad was partly his fault, and offered to share his life force with her. Silverwood admitted he believed Azebia could change the fate of her kingdom, and now nothing could stop her. Suddenly, an evil inner voice echoed in her head, asking if Azebia actually bought that garbage. Silverwood said that now the princess could act as she wished, and her evil subconscious sarcastically wondered what she could possibly do. A sinister voice promised she'd suffer and die in the end, but the main character declared that it wouldn't happen this time. Azebia yelled that she didn't care if she was destined to die this time or not, and announced that she wasn't going to be afraid anymore. Meanwhile, at the border checkpoint, one of the guards yawned, and his superior scolded him for almost missing Her Highness's arrival. He greeted the princess, who was now 20 years old. The chief of the guard personally reported that the number of casualties had decreased since she started reinforcing the borders. Her Highness said she was glad to help, and the young man replied that she'd done more than just help. He pointed out that even the thorny vines she'd wrapped around their barricades were worth a lot, and she also donated a large number of arrows and almost impenetrable shields. The guy said that it might sound crazy, but sometimes it felt like she'd been through a war alongside the troops. After those words, Azebia remembered sitting on the battlefield as a ghost, mourning the slain. She smirked, noting the guy was pretty perceptive, and he froze for a few seconds, totally confused. 10 years had passed since the main character went back in time, and one day Azebia was working late again. After meeting the Lady of the Silver Forest, the girl was able to master powerful magical abilities. Now, in just a couple of seconds, she can grow a huge number of gigantic plants. It was on this day that the main character decided to build barriers around the border zone and surround it with impenetrable forests. She was wondering if she could use magic to make arrows when suddenly a few drops of blood landed on the page. The girl rubbed her nose, thinking she couldn't slow down now since news of Kana's conquests was reaching her quickly, even in this life. Azebia knew it wouldn't be long before he reached Arkai, and they were powerless to stand against the Ryondan Empire. The thought of it made the main character so angry she was seeing red, and she vowed to do everything she could to protect her country. The princess got some bad news today. A letter arrived from Kana Ryondan himself. The letter only said 3 words: he wants the princess. At the council, the princess's closest advisors were outraged that this barbarian would even suggest such a thing. One of them yelled that there's no way they'd hand her over to that tyrant, but the girl just laughed to herself. She remembered perfectly well how, in her past life, they did exactly that without a second thought, but this time they're putting on a whole show of emotions. The girl mentally noted that the letter was the same last time. Ezebia knew that Emperor Kana used to be a slave, and she figured that maybe he'd also gone through a humiliating past. The main character also guessed that everyone's contempt is what made Kana such a cold and cruel person. What worried her more was whether everyone at the council really believed that the Archaea army could stand up to the imperial forces. Suddenly, the crown prince spoke up and said that, of course, he was disgusted by the thought of giving his sister to that tyrant. He urged everyone to consider whether a true ruler shouldn't be absolute, decisive, and think of his people. The girl laughed inwardly because it was obvious that her brother was just using the people as an excuse and was eager to pawn his sister off to a monster. Dietrich turned to Ezebia, saying that as the guardian of Arche, she should understand him, and the girl agreed. Then, the main character, with a smile on her face, declared that she would gladly marry Kana Riandon. A week later, Dietrich visited his sister's chambers. The girl asked what brought him there, and he asked her not to be so cruel. He added that the princess would be leaving far away tomorrow, so why not have one last heart-to-heart with her dear brother? Ezebia coldly replied that if the guy had some urgent business with her, he shouldn't delay and just say it. Then he tossed a blue pendant onto the table. She asked what she needed that for. Dietrich said that his sister doesn't read enough books because she doesn't know that it's a communication artifact. The young man explained that this artifact would allow her to contact home at any time, so she should keep it with her. The brother said that while in the Empire, the princess should find out Kana's weaknesses and report them to him. The princess wondered why Dietrich was doing this, since the Riandon Empire and the Archaea Kingdom were allies. The young man replied that the marriage was just a cover, while the Empire was rapidly developing, and they needed to take advantage of that. The princess protested that if she got caught, it could start a war. Dietrich laughed and remarked that his sister was so naive. He declared that he was already preparing for war and would attack Riandon when the opportunity was right. Dietrich boasted that he had already secured the support of several northern states, and besides, he already had a powerful ally. Her brother concluded that when they were all prepared together, they could easily crush the Riandon emperor. At the mention of a powerful ally, the princess's mind clicked. Her brother couldn't have acquired that magical item on his own. There's probably a powerful wizard on his side, someone who knows where to get artifacts or can make them. Right then, for some reason, the girl remembered the mage from her past life who shot an arrow at her when she was riding in a carriage. The girl was frightened by her own thoughts, wondering if the same sorcerer was involved and if her older brother was trying to start another war. Dietrich asked his sister why she was silent, but the girl was wondering what would happen if she rejected her brother's offer right now. She figured he'd probably just off her, like he did before, and everything would go back to being the same. The main character was tormented by the question of whether she could change anything at all. No matter how hard she tried to change things, she couldn't prevent the terrible future. Dietrich wondered if his sister actually believed that her marriage to the emperor would somehow fix things. Seeing the bewilderment in Ezebia's eyes, the young man remembered that the poor thing didn't know the whole truth. He placed a document in front of her, explaining that he'd brought it specifically for his sister because the information inside was top secret. He revealed that the keepers of Archaea can't have children. Being a keeper means giving yourself entirely to the Silver Forest. He summed up that his sister would never be able to become a mother and wouldn't be able to use magic outside of Archaea. The girl was in shock and blurted out that it had to be a lie, but Dietrich countered that it was the truth. He said he found the document way back in the deepest corner of the secret library, a place only the king can access. The guy asked the girl to imagine how pissed Kana would be when he finds out his wife can't give him an heir. Dietrich said the emperor definitely won't forgive Archaea for this dirty trick and will want payback. Ezebia yelled that she'd had enough of the lies, and the guy asked her to think about why there's no mention of the Guardian's descendant in any history book. The main character couldn't believe it, but she still wondered, what if it's true? Is she doomed to fail at preventing the war again, even in this life? Meanwhile, the emperor was washing the blood of his enemies off his body, and the advisor asked if he realized they'd be attacked when they crossed the border. The guy grumbled that there could be so many bandits and deserters in these woods, and His Majesty isn't even wearing armor. The emperor ordered the blonde assistant to cut the crap and just hand over some clean clothes. He said he couldn't show up to meet his future wife covered in sweat and road dust. The personal maid begged her lady to come inside immediately because it's cold on the balcony, but Ezavia replied that she needed to get some fresh air. The woman gasped because the princess was deathly pale, even though it was her wedding day with Kana. The girl remembered that she'd gone straight to the library after talking to Dietrich. She spent hours there and was horrified to discover her brother was right. There wasn't a single mention of a guardian's child. Wizards' kids inherit their magic, so the princess figured the emperor wanted to marry her to get an heir with magic. Ezavia realized the Silver Forest gave her magic, which meant her brother was right. She really was never meant to have children. The girl was wondering what to do now when suddenly, a town crier's shout echoed from below, directed at all the residents of Arsea. It was announced that Emperor Kana Riandon had arrived to seal the marriage alliance. To get a better look at the arriving guests, the princess leaned too far, earning a scolding from the displeased maid. A wave of heat washed over the main character because His Majesty was really here, and now there was no getting out of it. Sitting in the drawing room, the girl was tormented by doubts that she wouldn't be able to prevent the war because the alliance was doomed as soon as Kana learned the truth. On the bright side, there's still a glimmer of hope, since Big Bro didn't just off Ezebia like he did last time. He actually asked her to join him, even spilled some top-secret keeper info to sweeten the deal. So Dietrich thinks his sister's got something to offer. Based on that, she figured she should play along. Ezebia realized she wasn't going to get iced, so she decided to take her time and let His Majesty in on the keeper secret. Just as she decided to prove she was actually one of the good guys, BAM! The door swings open and the emperor walks in. They exchanged the usual greetings, and the emperor reached for his bride's cheek, but she awkwardly flinched away. Then he said it seemed like this marriage wasn't exactly making the princess jump for joy. She insisted she was thrilled. The emperor called that a pretty little lie, and she shot back that she wouldn't dare lie to His Imperial Majesty. He pointed out he wasn't great with all the fancy etiquette stuff, but he didn't want his future wife calling him that. Ezebia wondered, did the emperor talk to her this casually, without all the titles, even back in her previous life? The girl figured it was impossible since they hadn't even met before the wedding, and she was killed right after. He suggested they call each other by their first names and called the main character just Ezebia, and she froze, totally caught off guard. She was struck by how beautiful her name sounded coming from Kana. He asked why she was so quiet, like she'd forgotten his name or something. The young man just stood there, confused. Ezebia couldn't get a coherent word out, just stammered out a slight change. Seeing her mistress in her wedding dress, the maid Cecilia told her how beautiful she looked and started to cry. The princess told the maid to stop crying. She replied that she was really sad because her mistress was getting married under these circumstances. Cecilia remarked that her mistress could have had a beautiful, elaborate dress. The main character thought about it. The maid was right. Compared to her wedding dress from her past life, this one looked pretty simple. Cecilia fell to her mistress's feet and begged her not to go anywhere. Her Highness ordered her to calm down, saying it's not like she was walking into the jaws of doom. Although, when you think about it, it's kinda true. She'll be risking her neck every single day just being in the Empire. The girl realized His Majesty was holding her country hostage, and she was taken to be the future mother of magic-powered kids. Ezebia's gonna have to hide the fact she can't give him what he wants forever, so they're not a couple at all, more like enemies who just happened to meet on the battlefield. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife and gave the okay for the vow-sealing kiss, Canuck lifted her veil. In that moment, the princess thought to herself that she'd noticed in her past life how handsome her new husband was. She figured the emperor looked like a god on the outside, but she'd seen him on the battlefield, and she wasn't scared of him anymore. Ezebia decided to see this marriage only as a way to achieve peace, so she didn't care how the emperor treated her. When His Majesty's lips were almost touching hers, the princess suddenly pulled back and asked him to hold on a second. All the guests gasped in shock, and Canuck asked his young wife if everything was all right. She thought to herself that everything should be all right now. As they loaded the carriage, the main character couldn't believe she was already leaving the palace with her brand new husband. It sucked that they even canceled the wedding reception. It felt like she was ditching her home castle sooner than in her past life. She got so bummed out that she touched the artifact her older brother gifted her and remembered their recent conversation. Dietrich said his sister made the right call agreeing to cooperate, since she chose her homeland, Archaea. She thought that was a joke, but just then the Emperor approached her and said she was pale as snow and lost in thought. Azevia was actually thinking that Kanash would figure out she was infertile when, after years, she still didn't have a kid. She realized that in that case, everything would go to hell, especially if she didn't stop her older brother in time. Watching his new wife's sad face, Canuck noted that everything was going according to plan. He hurried toward the carriage and firmly declared that he'd ride along, even though it was against northern customs. The Emperor added that he was worried about his wife's condition, then knelt down and announced he would help Azevia get in. The girl's jaw dropped. She was so shocked she couldn't even stammer out a sentence. Kana hinted it was time to hustle or the staff would start gossiping. The main character made a mental note. This definitely didn't happen in her past life. She wondered, back then, was the Emperor this charming? And did she feel these warm and fuzzy feelings towards him? On the way to the Imperial Palace, Kana remarked that his wife still looked so sad. Azevia asked what he meant by that. The guy grumbled that he couldn't figure her out. Maybe she was sick or plotting an escape. The girl scoffed, saying that was ridiculous. From now until the end of time, she was the Emperor's lawful wife. It was her duty. Kay laughed, dripping with sarcasm, saying he was so flattered. Then he asked if all princesses were like this. The girl asked him to clarify. Then the Emperor wondered if kissing a man she loathed was also part of her duty. The main character's eyes widened in surprise, and she asked what was up with His Majesty today. Why was he talking like she hated them? The young man confessed that since their first meeting, he'd always wanted to know, what kind of person did Azevia think he was? The girl blushed at first, then quickly rattled on, saying she thought His Majesty was definitely a hero. She said she'd heard all about the Emperor's background and the tough road to the throne, as well as his accomplishments. Kay scoffed, saying he didn't need the rehearsed answer of the Archaea princess. He wanted to hear Azebea Catheryl's honest opinion of him. Then he asked if the girl also thought him a hero. She tried to gather her thoughts, but couldn't manage to say anything coherent. Then the young man remarked that everything was clear now. It seemed his wife couldn't overcome her fear of her own husband. He said he'd expected something like this, but this marriage was finally starting to get to him. A terrible thought occurred to the main character. Her husband was hinting that he wanted to end their marriage. Then she jumped up abruptly and shouted that it was a misunderstanding. That's not what she meant at all. Kay, in a commanding tone, advised his wife to sit down, since standing in a moving carriage wasn't safe. Suddenly, the horse neighed and braked sharply. The carriage shuddered from the sudden jolt. The main character lost her balance. Her husband noticed and caught his beloved. She landed awkwardly against his chest. When Azebia fell into Kana's arms, he anxiously asked if she was all right. For a second, the girl wondered how nice it felt to feel her husband's heart beating and his chest rising. Kana snapped her out of her thoughts, asking if his wife was okay and if she was hurt. The newlyweds were caught off guard by a guard's shout, asking if His Majesty was all right. The Emperor asked what happened, and the guard apologized for the abrupt dismissal and delay. He explained that a tree had fallen and blocked the path, which scared the horse, but they'd clear it soon. Kay thought it was all very strange. Then his gaze was drawn to Azebia, who suddenly turned pale and clutched her chest in agony. Dietrich told his sister that guardians can't use their abilities outside of Archaea, since their magic belongs to the Silver Forest. Secretly, she had hoped that was a lie, but now she feels the magic actually leaving. She realized that if something happened, like an attack on the carriage, she'd be totally helpless. That little voice in her head piped up again, asking Azebia if she thought her older brother was behind the sudden stop. The voice said Dietrich was planning to off his sister just like last time and use it as an excuse to start a war. The main character told that nasty voice in her head to shut its yap, but it kept going, calling Azebia a poor thing, 'cause she's gonna die again. She tearfully begged it to stop, but the voice ignored her, saying how pathetic Azebia was, all alone and powerless to do anything. Suddenly, Kanak's voice cut through like a ray of sunshine, saying nothing was wrong, everything was okay, he was there. He assured her that no one would dare hurt her while he was around. His steady breathing and calm voice soothed Azebia. Night had fallen, and the carriage was still headed for the Imperial Palace when Kanak suddenly broke the silence and apologized. His new wife was totally surprised and asked him to explain, so he confessed that he'd been acting like a real jerk towards her. The young man added that back then, he thought Azebia couldn't stand the sight of him. He admitted he knew damn well a woman like Azebia probably wouldn't be thrilled with this whole marriage thing. Kay told his wife to get it through her head that even if she thinks her husband's some kind of hero, he's never gonna break their vows. He clarified the peace treaty was still on, so she didn't need to be afraid of her dear husband. In that moment, the main character realized what those feelings she'd been having for Kanash all this time were. After all, she barely talked to him in her past life, and only now could she understand what kind of person he really was. Azebia said she wasn't lying when she said she'd heard about her husband's achievements. The thing is, to study the enemy's weaknesses, the main character examined a ton of documents about the Ryandon Empire. Digging through the papers, she learned that Kanak's rise saved the people of the empire from the tyranny of the former monarch. That's also when she found out he freed the oppressed slaves. The more Azebia read, the more she learned about His Majesty's accomplishments, things she hadn't wanted to hear about in her past life. After thinking it all over, the girl said she wasn't afraid of her husband at all, and she didn't mind the marriage. Azebia smiled mysteriously and addressed her husband by his first name, which surprised him because she never did that. She replied sheepishly that she was just following instructions and not using his title. Then she added that she wanted to thank her dear husband for keeping her from falling when the carriage braked so hard. Naturally, the guy was flustered. The awkward silence was broken by a guard shouting that they had arrived at the port. The girl looked out the window in shock. She couldn't believe everything was okay. Only when she saw the dock did she finally calm down, realizing she'd managed to change the future. She was happy she hadn't died in that carriage, and that she'd managed to prevent the war between Arki and Ryandon from starting. Now, the main character just had to sort out her feelings for her brand new husband. Baron Oslin was complaining, asking what was up with His Majesty this time, since all last month it was serenades about the princess. He pointed out how weird it was for them to practically bolt from Arki right after getting hitched. His advisor reported that the imperial carriage had recently left the woods, according to the report. The old man exclaimed that the young couple was close, and his lord, smirking, said that was excellent. He couldn't wait to finally meet the Empress. Stepping out of the carriage, Azebia saw the massive ships and exclaimed in awe. Kana explained that you couldn't reach the Empire on smaller vessels. He warned her to watch her step since it was already dark. She replied not to worry, she could see just fine. Just her luck, the second Azebia said that. She slipped. Kana saved her from falling, a sweet moment that'll make any viewer's heart skip a beat. Azebia thanked her husband for the help, and he put his arm around her shoulder, took her hand, and announced that they would walk together now. The girl stammered that it wasn't necessary since she just tripped, but the guy countered that she might have a sprain or a bruise. The main character felt slighted that her husband saw her as fragile, while the Baron was surprised the Emperor was walking arm in arm with his wife, not caring who saw. The Baron introduced himself as Oslin Beynar, a first-rank official from the Ryandon Empire's Ministry of Internal Affairs. The girl was stunned, realizing this was the very man she'd read so much about in those documents. Oslin Beynar's family used to be dirt poor, but the Baron managed to make them rich, thanks to his skills, intuition, and gut feeling. He never judged people by their status, but paid attention to who they really were, which is why he noticed Kana when he was a battle slave. The Baron started a revolution with Kana as the future emperor and acted as his advisor and strategist. The girl thought how wild it was, like she was meeting a character straight out of a book. Kay added that, on top of everything else, the Baron rightfully held a position in the Ministry of Internal Affairs, so it was important for Azebia to get to know him. The main character introduced herself as Azebia Cataril, now Rondon. After that, the Emperor just zoned out, like he was watching some fascinating video online. The Baron gave his buddy a nudge and said it was time for His Majesty to get on board. That snapped Kanak back to reality, and he rushed to help his wife, telling her to hold on to him, but she shot back that she could walk on her own. The newlyweds started bickering in front of everyone, the wife arguing that she could manage, since she'd only recently gotten hurt. The Baron cut their lovey-dovey act short, asking if they were already so close that they were using first names. Azebia realized he had a point. It really wasn't proper with so many servants around. She opened her mouth to apologize, but the Emperor cut her off, asking what was so wrong with his wife calling him by his name. Baron Oslin explained it was a matter of etiquette, but His Majesty retorted that it was convenient he remembered now, since he'd been using his name himself. The Emperor was yelling at the Baron, who was trying to explain himself, and the girl thought someone was about to take a swim. The main character mentally noted that Canuck had apologized in the carriage after realizing his past behavior had been out of line. She also remembered that when she'd tripped, Canuck's whole world had zeroed in on her. The main character figured her husband was the type who only shows kindness and affection behind closed doors. So, in the next second, Azebia loudly announced that she wasn't feeling too hot. She'd been playing the perfect wife up until now, but this was a low blow because her dear husband was genuinely freaked out. He started beating himself up for not noticing sooner, then scooped her up in his arms, announcing he'd carry her to her cabin. Azebia struggled and yelled that she could manage on her own, but Kana kept striding forward, a sight that stunned the Baron and his aides. Her shouts, demanding to be let go, echoed across the docks for quite a while. Kana carried his beloved into a beautifully and expensively furnished room and told her to let him know if she needed anything. The main character, like any girl in her situation, now felt totally embarrassed, and the Emperor gave her a suspicious look. He asked if she was really just feeling a little under the weather, since her face was flushed. She probably had a fever. Azebia assured her husband that everything was fine, while thinking to herself what an awkward situation this had become. She spotted a gorgeous dress on the bed that really brought out her green eyes and asked if it was for her. Canuck nodded and asked if she liked it. She exclaimed that she loved it. It was her favorite shade of green. Azebia felt a lump in her throat. No one had ever given her such a thoughtful gift before. She was incredibly grateful to her husband and promised to take good care of the dress. He said not to worry about it. It was just clothes. Then he said he had to run. He had things to take care of, but she should relax for a bit. Canuck promised to be back soon. Azebia asked why he was saying that, and he reminded her that they were husband and wife now. He said that spouses are supposed to sleep in the same bed. She replied that she'd somehow forgotten that part. She was floored by the realization that her husband wanted to share a bed with her and was planning on spending the night together. Then it hit her. It was to be expected, since the Emperor married the princess to produce an heir. The main character had hoped he'd wait until they were at least in the Empire, but it looks like this was going to happen sooner rather than later. The girl wondered what the rush was all about. Could it be that she was really that desirable to Kana? But sadly, no matter how beautiful Azebia was, her husband would soon realize his wife couldn't give him a child. Suddenly, Kana touched the girl's chin and pulled her face close. Azebia mentally started freaking out. He was way too close, and she couldn't believe this was actually about to go down, like, right now. But instead of a kiss, the Emperor explained that he mentioned sharing a bed because he was worried about his wife's reputation. He pointed out that sleeping in separate beds could reflect badly on Azebia, since she's not just the Empress, but also his wife. The Emperor clarified that sharing a bed didn't mean a wedding night, and she could rest assured he wouldn't pressure her. Azebia meekly replied that she agreed to do whatever it took to please her husband. He winced. Kana stated he'd rather not do anything on the ship at night. Besides, it's awful to get into bed with someone against their will. He declared that he was willing to wait until his wife was ready for their wedding night. The girl was surprised by his words, asking why Kana was being so kind to her, and if he didn't need an heir. The young man laughed, saying it was their first time discussing a night together, and his wife was already worried about strengthening the Empire's position. He remarked, quite pleased, that he was very lucky to have such a devoted wife. The young man said that if Azebia really wanted to give him an heir so badly, then he could stick around for a while. The only thing he asked was that she pretend to actually love him. Finally, Kana said that even though this marriage was a political alliance, he hoped that one day love would blossom between them. While working, the young man couldn't stop thinking about his conversation with his wife and her desire to bear an heir. He concluded that things were much more complicated than he'd thought, but maybe that was even better for both of them. The guy figured that since the girl didn't remember anything about the past, it would be easier to start over with a clean slate. Suddenly, Baron Oslin burst into the Emperor's cabin and indignantly asked if His Majesty had really sent his troops to defend the borders of Arche. He was pissed that the Emperor hadn't consulted anyone, but Kanna shot back that Arcia lost its guardian because of him, so this made perfect sense. The Baron snapped that this political alliance was total garbage, since the Empire's people were the best at everything, and they could have just conquered the whole nation. He called out his friend for not even asking Arcia for permission to mine minerals on their land. He asked sarcastically if it didn't seem like a bad idea to sacrifice loyal soldiers for some spoiled princess. His Majesty roared at Oslin to watch his mouth, because the Empress was far from spoiled, and they'd give her anything and everything, no holds barred. Oslin yelled that this was insane. The Emperor must have lost his mind, and the Emperor told the official to get out, saying it was stuffy enough in here already. The Baron concluded that his lordship was clearly out of it, and didn't even notice it was freezing in the cabin. Meanwhile, the main character was suffering in her cabin from excruciating pain, guessing it was this painful to lose the Guardian's powers. The girl decided her beloved absolutely couldn't find out about this, so she just needed to ask the servants to bring her some kind of medicine. Azebia begged herself to hang in there, just to make it to the door of the cabin. She barely had the strength to reach the door and open it. Without even looking up, she mumbled to the figure standing there that she desperately needed medicine. Turns out, the figure was His Majesty. He immediately got worried about his wife, but she insisted it was nothing serious. The Emperor stopped Azebia, saying he didn't buy it. He could see from her exhausted face that it wasn't just a headache. He declared he'd call a doctor right away, but suddenly the girl started feeling incredibly nauseous, her stomach cramping up even though she hadn't eaten anything. Our heroine's gut twisted into knots, and a second later, she was mortified by what she'd just done. Kanna was just as shocked as Azebia, or any of you guys watching, and stared at the wet patch on his shirt. The girl nearly died of embarrassment, but on top of that, she was burning up with fever. She kept apologizing, saying she didn't mean for it to happen. The guy said he was definitely calling a doctor now, and Azebia's vision started to blur. She wondered what would happen now. Things hadn't exactly started off great between the young couple, and now the clumsy wife had ruined his clothes. Azebia figured her husband was probably furious, and wouldn't be surprised if he reconsidered the whole arrangement after this. Just then, that nasty voice in her head jumped her again, saying Azebia was screwing up big time. It sneered, asking if it was really that hard to please the Emperor, especially now that she'd lost the magic he wanted so bad. The voice cackled, saying if she kept this up, something way worse was coming her way. Snapping back to reality, she blurted out how sorry she was for messing up his clothes, and that she'd clean everything up right away. Kanna told her not to sweat it. It wasn't her problem. He'd make it like it never happened, and took off the dirty shirt. Sorry folks, gotta cut the shot of Kanna's chest, but in the story he said he's gonna change into something clean. The girl slumped onto the couch, saying she was scared this whole thing was gonna really bum out her husband. Kanna shot back that he wasn't so stuck up that he'd be disappointed in someone just for getting seasick. She was actually a little stunned that he'd come up with an explanation for her feeling bad all on his own. He felt her face to check for a fever, guessing it was probably her first time being on a ship for so long. The guy said the most important thing is not to let this whole thing get you down. He admitted that this situation got him thinking about his days on the battlefield. Kanna said back then almost every day was a new fight, and one day he ran into this clingy stranger. The guy said this dude kept following him around, begging to join the revolution, promising to serve him faithfully until the end of his days. One day on the road, they stumbled upon the corpse of a dead soldier. That persistent stranger started screaming hysterically that he couldn't take it anymore. Kanna asked his wife to guess who it was, but she had no idea. Then the Emperor confessed that it was Baron Oslin, who, instead of apologizing, accused Kanna of deliberately walking down a road with so many bodies. The girl laughed, saying she would never have believed that Baron Oslin Beynar was such a softie. Kanna replied that after a couple of years, his friend stopped being such a crybaby. The guy added that he told this story to prove to his wife that time heals all wounds. He figured a couple more sea voyages, and this whole thing would just fade from her memory. The girl wondered if he took his own past memories so lightly, like they were just minor hiccups. Azebia thought, if that's really how it is, it's kinda heartbreaking how life's been unfair to him, and she wanted to get to know the real Kana better. The main character's thoughts were cut off by a knock at the door. A redhead was waiting for permission to come in. He was totally winded because he'd been booking it over here, and now he was kicking himself, thinking he was probably too late. Kana snapped, asking if this darn doctor finally decided to show up, even though he called him ages ago and he's supposed to be on call. Azebia told him not to get so worked up, it's still early. The sun's not even up yet, so being late is understandable. The Emperor told the guy to come in and get to work already. He apologized and said he just wanted to make sure he had everything. Kana yelled that he wasn't going to listen to any excuses, especially since the Empress is in dire need of a doctor. The dude in the white coat said it was a huge honor to work with her and introduced himself as Simon, the royal physician. The main character was floored that this unassuming, kinda lazy-looking kid was the royal physician of the great empire. The girl thanked the guy for coming so early, introduced herself as Princess Arkia and the new empress of the Ryandon Empire. Simon hesitantly replied that he was always at her service, but His Majesty got pissed, wondering how long this jerk planned to chat. The Emperor said menacingly that while Simon was goofing off somewhere, the Empress was suffering, so the physician's job was to find out why. The girl asked her husband not to put so much pressure on the young man, since she already felt much better. Kay replied that carelessness has dire consequences. He yelled at Simon, asking why he was still standing around and not getting to it, and the guy in the white coat rushed to the Empress. Azebia noticed that the poor guy in the white coat was trembling. He must be so scared of the Emperor. She touched Simon's hands and asked how old he was, and the guy replied that he would be 18 soon. She pointed out how young he was, almost her brother's age, and that he must be incredibly talented to already be a court physician. Simon replied that he still had much to learn, but Azebia said she didn't buy it. She clarified that if the young doctor wasn't skilled, the Emperor wouldn't have hired him, and asked her husband to back her up. Kana tamped down his anger and said that Simon had a unique memory, able to recall things in minute detail with just a glance. Simon was surprised when His Majesty said that not everyone could memorize the entire human anatomy at such a young age. The main character happily concluded that Simon had nothing to fear now, knowing that her lord valued him. The young physician said that in truth his masters were flattering him. He didn't possess any special talent, but he would do everything to help the Empress. Lady Ryandon thanked Simon for being willing to dedicate himself to his work, meaning they didn't need to worry about their health with him around. After Simon left, the Emperor remarked that he was a very modest guy, hence his shyness around people he didn't know well. The girl replied that there's nothing wrong with that. She explained that she was glad to have met another person from her husband's inner circle. Kana was all like, holding Simon's hand? You call that just being friendly? Azebia thought to herself that her husband seemed bummed out, like he wanted her to keep her distance from other guys. She apologized, but he said, "Don't sweat it. I'm not gonna blow a fuse." She explained that Simon reminded her of her brother, so she just couldn't help but offer him some support. Azebia added that when Kana hugged her in the carriage, it showed her how comforting and reassuring a touch could be. She promised she wouldn't do it again and would be more mindful of her actions from now on. Suddenly, Kana told his wife he had something for her, something to take away the nasty aftertaste of the medicine. He popped something in Azebia's mouth, and after getting over the surprise, she asked what it was. After tasting it, she exclaimed that she loved candied raspberries. Kana replied smugly that he had plenty more where that came from, and he was happy to share, but she was still carefully savoring the first one. The young dude was all soft and mushy, thinking his wife was like a little bunny, shyly nibbling on lettuce. I bet most viewers were expecting something steamy to happen right then, but sadly, nada. Kanak stood up and said the medicine would kick in soon, plus it was late, his wife needed to rest, and he had paperwork to finish. The girl asked if her husband was really just going to turn around and leave like that, and he said he'd brought all the necessary papers there. He added that he couldn't leave his beloved alone until he was sure she was doing okay. The young dude promised the main character he'd keep an eye on her, so she went to sleep without worry. Every so often, Ezebia would wake up and see Kanash sitting at his desk, buried in work. She thought about how he overlooked her lack of manners and genuinely cared about her and her health. She wondered if he really wanted to love her like a real wife. The girl concluded that if this marriage helped the people and brought peace, then maybe, just maybe, she could love her husband too. Suddenly, she pictured Dietrich smirking, telling his sister she shouldn't even dream about it. The girl realized her brother was right. She couldn't give Karkan an heir, so he'd toss her out the second he found out the truth. She knew that in that scenario, her husband's generosity, tenderness, and kindness would instantly turn to cruelty and rage. Ezebia understood that she shouldn't get too caught up in her feelings for Kana, because her main goal was to save Archaea. The main character tossed and turned, thinking maybe she should let her husband know that everything between them was just a game. When Ezebia woke up in the morning, she found that Kana was gone. She figured this was her first time on a ship, so she didn't want to miss out on the experience. After a while, Ezebia was ready to go for a walk, but the governess tried to talk her out of it. She advised the lady to rest even more, but she replied that she felt much better after sleeping. Besides, she didn't want to spend the whole day cooped up in her cabin. The second the heroine stepped out on deck, a fierce wind slammed into her face, and the bright light made her eyes squint. After a couple of seconds, her eyes adjusted to the daylight, and they widened as she realized she was seeing the ocean up close for the very first time. Male voices called out from behind her, greeting the Empress. She turned, greeted the gentlemen in return, and thanked them for their service. In that instant, she realized they were looking at her with the same kind of eyes as Baron Oslin. Clearly, the Emperor's whole inner circle doesn't trust her, but that wasn't surprising, since Ezebia was a total stranger to them. You can see their point, since Riandon is a young empire, and its monarch definitely doesn't need any magic from Arkai. Kanak needed a wife from well-known circles within the empire, someone who could help him and secure support. Against the expectations of his close advisors, the emperor decided to marry a foreign princess from a crumbling kingdom. The main character understood why everyone was so wary of her, if not outright hating and despising her. The girl was lost in thought. She'd never dealt with anything like this before. Back in Arcan, everyone respected the Guardians. Ezebia was now almost afraid to imagine what kind of welcome gift the Riandon Empire had in store. Suddenly, someone called out to her again. She turned and saw Simon hurrying towards her. He exclaimed happily that he'd finally found the Empress. She mumbled that the medicine he'd given her had helped. The girl said the court physician had nothing to worry about. Then the Emperor's voice boomed out of nowhere. Kanak said he would definitely remember Simon's carelessness. Then he told Ezebia he'd been scared when he didn't find her in the cabin. He swept his wife into his arms and explained that it was time for her to go back. The ship was rocking too much. He didn't want her getting sick again. After the Emperor and Empress left, the red-haired guy breathed a sigh of relief. Ezebia asked him to put her down, pointing out that the Emperor's subordinates wouldn't like it. Kana was like, "What's with the formalities now?" She shot back that he's supposed to be setting an example for the nobles, and it's just not cool to snatch a woman and haul her off like that. The dude got all thoughtful, then confessed to his wife that there was something he'd been meaning to tell her for ages. Looks like they're about to lock lips, but nope, not again. He added that that's exactly why he was so driven to take the throne. He explained that he'd always dreamed of building a country where people felt free and weren't held back by etiquette and social climbing. He said that's why she shouldn't sweat what the inner circle thinks, because they accept their lord for who he is. Looks like even she's bummed that nothing happened between them in this situation. She felt around for some books and was all, "Huh? Where'd these come from?" Kana replied that he brought them while she was asleep, "'Cause you gotta have something to read on a long sea voyage." The guy guessed that the Empress wasn't much of a reader, but she immediately shut that down. She said she really loved reading, and usually spent every free moment doing it. So Kanak suggested they read together, and Ezebia agreed. To herself, she thought she never expected the Emperor to be into reading, but the more she got to know him, the more interesting he became. Ezebia always pictured His Majesty as a badass warrior, not some bookworm. Kanak was so serious and into it that she couldn't help but find his expression adorable. In that moment, she remembered how much she loved getting lost in a book in her past life, since there was no one to talk to in the palace. Back then, it was so lonely, and she happily escaped into other people's stories and thoughts. But now, Azabia knew what it was like to have someone to share her impressions and thoughts about the books she read. She loved that all you could hear in the cabin was the rustling of pages. She wished the world could be that quiet and peaceful. She woke up because someone was gently shaking her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open, and there was Kana, telling her the ship had docked and they'd be at the palace gates before she knew it. Cut to dry land. The main characters are riding from the port to the palace in a carriage. Azevia asked her husband if he needed some time to get ready, make a good impression on his people. She pointed out that their emperor was bringing back a foreign princess, and he said they'd see everything at the public address in a couple of days. The guy said he wanted to have a real wedding ceremony this time, since what happened back in Archaea was just going through the motions. Who else watching thinks our male lead is just the sweetest thing? He's so kind and gentle and such a total gentleman. The guy added that a wedding ceremony in the Empire would fully solidify her status as the emperor's wife. The main characters arrived at the ridiculously opulent imperial palace. There, they were greeted by Marianne, the head maid, who said everything was prepared for the imperial couple's comfortable stay. Azevia thanked her, and Marianne offered to give the lady a tour of the palace. She wanted the empress to get the lay of the land and settle in quick. Everywhere she looked, the place was dripping with luxury, all bling and sparkle. It hit Azebia then why Archaea lost the war in her past life. Even this castle screams Riandan Empire's dominance. The lady gazed out the window, pointing to one building, saying it looked out of place. Mariana piped up, saying that estate's an extension of the palace. She offered to let the lady check it out up close, but Azebia said maybe later, thinking something was definitely off. The girl thought that extension was a dead ringer for the royal palace back in Archaea. The empress said she wanted to keep exploring the palace, and the maid said she'd be happy to show her around. She asked her to check out the second floor, announcing it was entirely dedicated to their future kids. Then she opened a door, saying this was the master bedroom, where the empress would be sleeping. Azebia was blown away by what she saw. Everything looked so lavish and expensive. But she managed to pull herself together to tell Mariana it was too much for her, but the maid just ignored it. The woman led her grace to a secluded room and mentioned that a bath had been drawn for Her Majesty, because there's nothing better after a long journey. The empress thanked Mariana, then walked over to the bed, covered with a nice silk blanket. Just then, the head maid said she'd check with the staff to see if everything was ready for tonight, and Azebia asked her to clarify what that meant. The maid explained that tonight the emperor and his wife would spend their first night here. Hearing that, our girl froze in shock. Now folks, let's jump ahead in time and see how Canock reacted to the bedroom when he arrived. He said that while he was busy working, this room had changed a lot. Azebia said the servants worked hard to make sure tonight was one to remember for them. Canock didn't immediately get why tonight should be special, then said he figured out why his wife was wearing that nightgown. Azebia asked if it was too much, and the guy got super flustered and said it looked amazing on her. He admitted that even though he promised to wait patiently until his wife was ready, seeing her like this made it really tough on him. Seeing the confusion in his wife's eyes, he told her to forget he said anything and suggested they get some rest. He said Azebia looked exhausted from the day, and she apologized. She said she wasn't really familiar with all this stuff, but he told her there was no need to apologize, because he wasn't exactly an expert either, never having been intimate with anyone. She widened her eyes, and he snapped that it wasn't that surprising. Azebia asked if the emperor wasn't supposed to, ensure the family line continued. To which he countered, did his wife want an experienced guy? She didn't say anything. Then Kana said there was no going back now. He couldn't just go out and learn how to do it. The girl replied that wasn't what she meant. It's just his confession was a little unexpected. The guy pointed out that the original problem was still there. They both have no clue what they're doing. All right, folks, buckle up, because things are about to get interesting. Kanash just suggested they get some practice in. He said he heard you gotta start by holding hands, and then suggested hitting the sack. See where things go, maybe let nature take its course. Esabaya got seriously flustered, started panicking about what to do, and the best she could come up with was saying her nightgown was super uncomfortable. She bailed, saying she needed to change, and the dude yells after her that the nightgown has buttons. Kanak rushes over to his wife, insisting he can help. After a few seconds of awkward silence, he asked if it was okay to touch her. The moonlight not only helped the guy get the job done, but it also added a little something special to the moment. Once he was finished, Kanak nervously swallowed and announced that it was all set. The girl thanked him and he said, "Not a problem, yet." In his head, the young man was thinking how awkward the situation was, since he never thought he'd be undressing someone like a servant. Cut to the bed. Kanak shakes off the awkwardness and calls out to his wife, suggesting they continue their practice. He pointed out she was lying so far away he couldn't even reach out to hold her hand. Azivia scooted closer and the young couple held hands. She asked if he was comfortable, since they'd suddenly ended up in the same bed after sleeping in separate cabins. Kanak confessed that during the voyage, he'd spent every night in his wife's cabin, sleeping in a chair. He added that at some point he only used his own cabin to change and shower. Every night in his cabin, Kanash heard his wife cry out and tell her brother she didn't want to go through with it. That's when he realized his beloved was being haunted by nightmares. The guy reminded her that he promised to always be there for her now, so he'd guard her sleep. Azevia remarked that Kanak really was a different person, nothing like what she'd imagined. She admitted that at first, she'd been afraid of her husband and thought he was dangerous, since he'd come to power through a revolution he'd started himself. She said that over time, her opinion had changed. But then she got scared about what would happen if her beloved didn't approve. Kanak assured her that he really liked Esabaya, and he didn't regret anything, not meeting her, not marrying her. He promised it would always be that way, because he needed his wife. Esabaya replied that she really liked her husband too, but to herself she thought, "Don't believe these sweet nothings." Kanak almost said that he needed his wife for future heirs and to take control of magical power through her. The girl sadly realized that he liked Esabaya the sorceress, not her. Waking up in the morning, the main character found a very beautiful bouquet of roses in a vase on the bedside table. She figured the maids were responsible, since there hadn't been any flowers there before. Just then, Mariana appeared in the bedroom. She greeted her ladyship and asked how the night was. Esabaya replied that thanks to the scented candles, she slept like a baby, without any nightmares. The headmaid said that was wonderful and asked if the Empress needed anything else. To herself, the girl thought about how polite the maid's speech was, along with her confident movements and manners. But even, "She's treating me like I'm gonna bite." Azebia figured there was no time to dwell on that. She had way too much to do around the Empire now. The girl asked for a light and quick breakfast because she wanted to head to the palace library afterwards. The library was gorgeous, especially the inlaid wood in the center that really blew her away. She remarked that there were more books here than anywhere else she'd ever seen. One of the courtiers explained to Her Highness that there were tons of books here that had never been published anywhere else in the world. The guy said that there was even a collection of legends and tales that used to be passed down by word of mouth. The Empress asked if there were any books about wizards, and he explained that she'd need to go to the secret section. He added that the Emperor and his wife could visit this section whenever they wanted. The girl figured if the most rare books were kept in this secret section, then it might hold the keys to the Guardian's powers. Suddenly, a book with a bright green cover caught her eye. She thought, maybe that book could help her out. Azebia grabbed it off the shelf, thinking that since the golden age of magic was hundreds of years ago, she didn't expect to find any useful info at all. The book was called The Rise of Magic on the Northern Continent, A History of Non-Human Races. Rumor has it, members of some of those races are still using magic. That's why you can find more info about guardians than you can about mages. The main character read about events from 300 years ago, when an evil army invaded the lands where humans lived. They even threatened the forest deity, the Silver Forest itself. And that's when a member of the Catheril clan heard the forest's call and came to help, vowing to protect Silverwood Forest until his dying breath. His loyalty and courage pleased the goddess Fahar, and she gifted the Catheril clan with divine power. But the fragile human body can't handle the power of the gods, so the guardians can't live normal human lives. Except for one person, Janessa Catheril, who completely dedicated herself to serving the goddess and protecting Silverwood Forest. She was an eternal friend to the forest elves, and by circumventing the limitations, her child received the elves' blessing. Azebia thought the history books only mentioned Janessa awakening 300 years ago, but she was wondering, how was she able to have a child? Azebia wondered, why is Janessa called the eternal friend of the elves? She figured if she met the elves, she could learn more about Janessa, but the question was, where to find them? Suddenly, someone called out to her. It was Kanak, asking why she was still here, skipping dinner. Was she trying to collapse from exhaustion? He'd heard whispers that the court ladies were getting antsy about the Empress's behavior, disappearing all day without a word. Azebia apologized, explaining she got lost in her books and didn't realize how much time had passed. She asked if her husband was really angry, and Kanak told her to stop giving him that pathetic, bunny-eyed look. He pointed out that she was the reason he had so many headaches today. The guy apologized if he sounded harsh, but she wondered why he was saying sorry if everything was cool. He took her hand and said he wasn't mad at all that she spent time in the library. He was just worried she wasn't taking care of herself, especially since she's so frail. Kanak said it was bound to happen sooner or later, considering how much his wife loves to read. She probably got goosebumps because Kanak moved in closer and said he regretted not figuring this out earlier. Much to everyone's disappointment, nothing romantic happened again, and Kana just walked away. Thankfully, a second later, the young man called out to his wife and asked her to follow him. The main character was greeted by the sight of a beautiful, spacious room with a fountain and various plants. She wondered aloud what this amazing place was. The guy replied that he felt it was important to show it to her as proof of how much he cared. He asked if she really liked flowers that much, and she agreed, and added that she especially liked flowers with small buds because they're super cute. Kana said he was glad his wife liked the place. He asked that next time she goes out to enjoy her favorite things, she should bring some food with her. The guy mentioned he's planning to plant a ton of tiny budded flowers all around this special palace. He made sure to point out that the special palace is brand new and stands all by itself. Azebia wondered to herself, did her husband build this castle just for her, and then show her this whole greenhouse? She didn't want to get her hopes up, but at the same time she really wanted to know why he was still being so sweet to her. Looking at another flower, Azebia started thinking about how weird she felt in this place. It was like she could feel her magic trembling. Kanak asked if something was wrong, because her expression totally changed. She said everything was fine, it was just that the flower was pretty interesting. Staring at the flower, Azebia thought that she assumed she couldn't use magic outside of Arkai, but what if she could at least talk to plants? She got the idea to try and chat with the flower when Kanak wasn't looking, but when she touched a petal, she heard a voice protesting that she shouldn't be there, complaining about why she'd even come. Azebia turned to Kana in a panic, but he was completely bewildered and asked if something was wrong again. All the while, she kept staring at her beloved with a frightened look. The flower screamed at her to get out of there or she'd die. Now, the author fast-forwards us a week and tells us about events happening in the same greenhouse. The flower that Azebia had admired earlier witnessed a conversation between a tall woman in a hat and an unknown man. The woman was telling the man that no matter how much he pleaded, her answer would stay the same. The man advised her not to be so nice or so harsh, but she shouted that she was proud of what she did. He said that was commendable, but shouldn't her own sister be more important than her job? His companion was taken aback and asked how he knew. The man replied that it didn't matter. The main thing was that the request wasn't that hard to fulfill. He asked if it was really that hard to report everything the Empress does and says. The woman tried to argue, but the man cut her off. He pointed out that if she came to this meeting again today, she must be interested in the offer. The man called his companion Marianne and asked what her answer was. The head maid of the imperial castle remembered walking through a poor and run-down district not long ago. She had come to visit her younger sister. The maid apologized for not being able to visit more often, saying she was just swamped with work at the palace. She addressed the girl lying on the bed as Edith and asked her to drink her medicine. The man's voice reached her again, saying what a pity it was that Marianne's younger sister suffered from a terrible illness. He said he was well aware that this awful disease was considered a curse in this isolated empire. The guy added that everyone knows if you don't keep taking those magic power potions, your body can turn to stone and you're a goner. He pointed out that in a world with no more wizards, the prices of those meds have gone through the roof. The stranger assured Mariana that by working with him, she could get her hands on some serious cash. He promised to give her more money than she could ever dream of. The girl asked if he was talking about such huge amounts. He must not be working alone. The man complimented her for figuring it out, and he said he could only reveal that kind of info once he heard a clear answer from Mariana, and asked her to weigh everything carefully. During her next visit to her sister, Mariana was tormented by thoughts of why the man had asked her for such a thing. Now, back at the Imperial Palace, Baron Oslin is handing His Majesty the tax assessment report for the western part of the empire. The young man added that he'd included his own recommendations for reforming the tax system with the report. Kanak said that at this rate, the reform proposals would be ready by the next council meeting. Then the emperor added that the meeting would be especially tough, since the old guard aristocrats would be dead set against the tax reform. He explained they'd be all about sticking to tradition, and if they shot down the reform plan, they'd sabotage the document review later. Oslin, sounding annoyed, pointed out the aristocrats not only cling to the old ways, but for some reason think they're entitled to run the whole show. His Majesty remarked it was a wonder they even let them near the throne, though it was probably just a surrender, really. Gotta remember, they're not exactly friendly, seeing as they lost last time and had to back down. He added that if those Vipers' money wasn't propping up the empire, they'd have met the same fate as the last emperor, heads rolling. Then Kana chimed in, saying he wasn't looking to spill any more blood, at least not inside the empire. Just then, for some reason, he remembered his wife confessing last night how much she adored him. The guy wondered if Ezebea knew what he'd been through. She probably wouldn't think he was so great or see him as some kind of hero. Now, let's check in on our main character, who's hanging out in the greenhouse. Marianne rushed up to her, all worked up, saying she'd heard the lady wanted to see her. Ezebia stood